Amber had lived in the tower for more than 100 years before everything changed. The tower stood on the edge of the Crystal Mountains where the ancient forests gave way to rocky peaks that touched the clouds. It was made of pale stone that had been carved from the mountain itself. Its walls thick and strong, designed to keep the harsh weather outside and warmth inside. The tower had many rooms, each one filled with things that Amber had collected over the centuries. Books lined the shelves, paintings hung on the walls, and strange objects from distant lands sat on tables and pedestals. But before she lived alone in the tower, Amber had lived in the great city of the elves. The elven city was built among the tallest trees in the world, with bridges of silver connecting each tree and platforms made of living wood that grew according to the wishes of the elves. Everything there was perfect. Everything was beautiful and eternal and unchanging. The elves did not age or die. They did not hunger or get sick. They lived in peace and harmony, following the same traditions that their ancestors had followed for countless ages. Amber's family was one of the most important families in the city. Her mother was the keeper of the ancient songs, and her father was a master of the old magic. They lived in a magnificent tree that stood at the heart of the city, its branches reaching so high they seemed to touch the stars. Amber should have been happy. She should have been content with this perfect life that all elves were supposed to want. But something inside her was different. From the time she was young, Amber asked too many questions. She wanted to know why things were done the way they had always been done. She wanted to know what existed beyond the borders of the elven lands. She wanted to understand the humans who lived far below in their kingdoms of stone and wood. Her parents told her that curiosity was not an elven quality. They said that wanting things to change was a sickness of the young heart, something that would pass with time. But it did not pass. As Amber grew older, her curiosity only became stronger. She spent her time reading the old human books that had come to the elven city through traders. She learned their language. She studied their customs and their ways. She became fascinated by their short lives and how they packed so much living into such a small amount of time. She wondered what it would be like to feel the urgency of mortality, to know that each moment mattered because it could not be repeated forever. One day, Amber told her family that she was leaving the city. She said she wanted to live alone in a tower far from the other elves, where she could study human things and learn their secrets. Her mother wept. Her father was silent. Her siblings thought she was going mad. But Amber left anyway. She took what she needed and she walked out of the city, never looking back, knowing that she might never be allowed to return. The journey to the tower took many weeks. Amber traveled through forests and across mountains, moving farther and farther from the lands of her people. She found the tower standing alone on a rocky peak, empty and waiting. It was old, built by humans long ago for purposes no one could remember. The humans who had built it were long dead, and the tower had been empty for centuries. Amber knew immediately that this was where she was meant to be. She cleaned the tower and made it her home. She brought books and supplies. She created a library of human texts and studies. She began to understand more about how humans lived and thought and created. But she was alone, and the solitude began to weigh on her heart. She wondered if she had made a mistake in leaving her people behind. Then one day, while walking in the mountains near her tower, Amber found a small cave that glowed with a soft blue light. She entered the cave carefully, her hand touching the cool stone walls. The light grew brighter as she went deeper. Finally, she came to a chamber where a mother dragon was lying on the ground, very sick and very weak. Beside her were two baby dragons, no more than a few days old, crying for food and comfort. The mother dragon looked at Amber with ancient eyes full of sorrow. Amber understood without words what was happening. The mother dragon was dying. She was asking Amber to care for her babies. Amber knelt down and spoke soft words to the mother dragon, promising that she would keep the babies safe and loved. The mother dragon closed her eyes and died peacefully, knowing her children would be protected. Amber took the two baby dragons back to her tower. She named the larger one Shimmer because his scales seemed to catch light and throw it back in beautiful purple patterns. She named the smaller one Coal because his scales were dark and black like burned wood. Both dragons were tiny enough to fit in her hands, with small wings and sharp little teeth. They chirped and squeaked constantly, hungry and lonely and scared. Amber learned to feed them by hunting in the mountains and preparing the meat carefully. She learned that Shimmer loved to play and was always getting into trouble, knocking things over and making messes. She learned that Coal was more serious and watchful, always protecting his sister even though he was smaller. She spent every day with them, teaching them to fly, teaching them to trust her, teaching them that they were loved. As the years passed, Shimmer and Coal grew stronger and larger. Their wings became powerful enough to carry them high into the sky. Their scales hardened and became beautiful. But they never left Amber. They stayed with her in the tower, sleeping in their special chambers, eating the food she prepared and following her everywhere she went. It was as if the three of them had been meant to be together, as if this was the family Amber was supposed to have all along. Amber was still lonely sometimes, even with the dragons. She longed for someone to talk to, someone to share her thoughts with. The dragons could not speak her language, though they understood many of her words and responded with their own sounds and feelings. She read her books and studied her human texts, but reading was not the same as sharing. She began to think about going back to visit the other elves, but something inside her knew she no longer belonged there. Then came the day that changed everything. Amber was walking in the mountains gathering plants for tea, when she saw something strange in the distance. A merchant's cart had overturned on the rocky path, its contents scattered everywhere. The merchant was gone, probably seeking help in a nearby village, but the cart was full of interesting things. Amber approached it carefully, wondering what treasure or danger she might find. The boxes were filled with ingredients and supplies meant for a human kingdom far away. There were spices in cloth packets, grains in sealed containers, dried fruits and vegetables, oils in glass bottles, and salt in wooden barrels. There were also books about food and cooking, their pages worn from being read many times. One book in particular caught Amber's attention. It was called The Art of Human Cooking, and it had beautiful illustrations showing different dishes and the steps to make them. Amber carefully carried everything back to her tower with the help of Shimmer and Coal. The dragons helped by carrying lighter boxes in their mouths and claws, curious about these new treasures. When Amber reached the tower, she placed everything in her storage room and immediately opened the cooking book. She sat by her window, reading late into the night, studying the pictures and the instructions. She read about bread and pasta and soups and roasted meats. She read about the chemistry of how heat changes food. She read about flavors and textures and combinations that seemed impossible. Something inside Amber came alive as she read. This was more than just studying humans. This was understanding creation itself. This was learning to make something that brought joy. Shimmer came and sat beside her as she read, resting her head on Amber's shoulder. Coal curled up at her feet. Both dragons seemed to sense that something important was happening. Amber looked at them and knew that whatever she was about to begin, it would change all their lives forever. She was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something new and unknown. But for the first time in her long elven life, she was not afraid.
She was excited.
She was alive in a way she had never been before. The next morning, Amber woke early and prepared to begin her first lesson in human cooking. She gathered the ingredients and tools she would need. She lit the fire in her cooking chamber, the flames dancing and warming the air. Shimmer and Coal watched from their favorite corner, their eyes bright with curiosity. Amber opened the book to the first recipe for bread and began to read the instructions very carefully. Her hands shook a little as she measured the flour and water. This simple act of following instructions felt like magic. This was the beginning of something that would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone who would ever taste what she would create. The first bread that Amber made was not perfect. The dough did not rise enough and the crust came out too dark on one side and too light on the other. But when Amber broke it open and tasted it, something magical happened. The warmth of it, the texture, the way the flavors came together even in this imperfect form, made her close her eyes and forget to breathe for a moment. This was different from anything she had ever eaten in her long life. This was creation. This was transformation. This was power. Shimmer came over and sniffed at the bread curiously. Amber broke off a small piece and gave it to her. The dragon's eyes grew wide as she tasted it. She made a sound of pure joy and asked for more with her whole body, jumping and dancing around Amber's feet. Coal watched from his corner, skeptical as always, but when he saw Shimmer's happiness, he came over slowly and accepted a piece for himself. Soon both dragons were eating bread and Amber was laughing, feeling a joy she could barely contain. That day marked the beginning of a transformation. Amber threw herself completely into learning the art of cooking. She woke early each morning and spent the entire day in her cooking chambers, reading recipes, measuring ingredients, following instructions exactly as they were written. She made bread daily, learning how temperature and timing and humidity affected the dough. She experimented with different flours and different methods. She failed constantly, but each failure taught her something new. Days became weeks and weeks became months. Amber's tower was constantly filled with the smell of cooking. Smoke rose from the chimney from sunrise to sunset. Shimmer and Cole grew accustomed to their role as taste testers, eating everything Amber made and somehow never getting tired of it. The dragons' bellies were always full and happy. Their scales seemed to shine brighter, as if the love and care in the food was making them healthier and more beautiful. Amber moved beyond bread. She started making pasta, which seemed impossibly complex at first. She had to understand how to mix flour and eggs into a dough, then roll it thin, then cut it into shapes. Her first attempts were terrible. The pasta was too thick or too thin. It broke while cooking or turned to mush, but Amber kept trying. She read the book over and over. She watched the instructions and tried to see what the author of the book was trying to teach. Slowly, her hands learned what her mind was reading. Slowly, she began to make pasta that was beautiful and delicious. She made sauces to go with the pasta, learning how to cook tomatoes with herbs and spices, learning how flavors developed over time as ingredients cooked together. She learned that some combinations worked perfectly while others did not. She learned to taste constantly, adjusting the salt and the spices and the heat until everything was balanced just right. Shimmer preferred the pasta with simple oil and herbs, while Cole loved anything made with meat. Amber made note of their preferences and began to understand that cooking was not just about following rules. It was about understanding people and what they loved. Amber began to experiment with other dishes from the human world. She made soups that were rich and filling, cooked for hours so that all the flavors melded together. She made roasted vegetables that caramelized at the edges and became sweet and tender. She learned to work with butter and cream, creating sauces that were smooth and rich and delicious. She learned about spices from distant lands, understanding which ones worked together and which ones fought against each other. But the greatest discovery came when Amber found some flour, sugar, eggs, and butter and realized she could make desserts. The first time she baked something sweet, she made a simple cake. It rose in the oven and came out golden and light and beautiful. When she tasted it, she understood why humans might consider food a form of prayer. The sweetness of it, the softness, the way it made her feel comforted and happy seemed almost spiritual. She made cookies that were crispy on the outside and soft in the middle. She made pastries with layers of dough and butter that flaked apart in her mouth. She melted chocolate and mixed it with sugar and butter to create something that tasted like happiness itself. Shimmer went crazy for chocolate. She would dance and squeak and ask for more with such joy that Amber could not help but laugh. Even serious Cole would allow a small smile when tasting something sweet and good. A year passed in this way. Amber had become a master of cooking. Though she did not think of herself that way, she only knew that she understood the ingredients better now. She knew how they worked together. She understood heat and timing and flavor. She had discovered that cooking was not just about survival or sustenance. It was about art. It was about bringing joy to others. It was about transformation and creation and magic. One evening, as Amber was preparing dinner for herself and the dragons, she decided to create something special. She wanted to make a complete meal, a feast that would show everything she had learned. She started early in the morning and worked all day. She roasted a chicken slowly with herbs until it was golden and tender. She made fresh bread with a crispy crust and soft interior. She made a sauce with cream and mushrooms that tasted like comfort. She made roasted vegetables that were perfectly caramelized. She made a dessert with chocolate and cream that seemed to contain all the love she felt for her two dragons. When everything was ready, Amber set the table in the main hall of the tower. She lit candles and arranged the food carefully. Then she called Shimmer and Cole to come and eat with her. The dragons understood that this meal was special. They ate carefully, savoring each bite, making sounds of satisfaction and joy. Amber watched them and felt her heart overflow with happiness. This was what cooking was meant to be. This was its purpose. This was why humans had written books about it. This was why people spent their lives perfecting this craft. That night, Amber sat by her window and looked out at the mountains. She thought about her life. She thought about leaving the perfect, unchanging elven city. She thought about finding the dying mother dragon and taking care of Shimmer and Cole. She thought about finding the merchant's cart filled with cooking supplies and books. She thought about how each of these moments had led her here, to this point where she had found her purpose. She realized that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was doing exactly what she was meant to do. The next morning, Amber decided that she wanted to share her food with others. She was tired of cooking only for herself and the dragons. She wanted to know what it felt like to see other people taste what she had created. She wanted to know if the joy she felt was something that could be shared and spread to others. She began planning how she could do this. The tower was far from any human settlements, but perhaps she could find a way to invite people to her home. Perhaps word could spread about what she was making. She did not have to wait long. A few weeks later, while Amber was gathering water from a stream in the mountains, she encountered two human hunters. They were rough men with hard faces and scarred hands, the kind of men who spent their lives in the wilderness hunting for survival. When they saw Amber, they were startled and confused. She was clearly not human, but she did not seem dangerous. Her movements were graceful and her voice was gentle when she greeted them. The hunters noticed smoke rising from the tower in the distance, and they smelled something wonderful in the air, something that made their mouths water and their stomachs growl. They asked Amber what she was cooking, and when she described her food, their eyes grew wide with wonder. They had never heard of such things. They had eaten simple fare their entire lives, and the idea that food could be art seemed impossible to them. Amber made a decision. She invited the hunters to her tower. She told them that if they came, she would cook them a meal they would never forget. The hunters followed her up the mountain path, amazed by the tower and confused by the two dragons that greeted them at the entrance. When Shimmer and Cole came out to investigate the strangers, the hunters fell to their knees thinking they had stumbled into some kind of magical realm. Amber welcomed them inside and began to prepare a meal. She made everything she could using all her skills and all her knowledge. She made roasted meat and fresh bread and soups and vegetables and desserts. She worked with love and care, putting everything she had learned into each dish. The hunters sat at her table and ate, and as they tasted the food, their rough faces transformed. They began to weep. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, unable to believe that food could taste this good. When the meal was finished, the hunters thanked Amber with a gratitude that came from the deepest part of their hearts. They told her that they had eaten the most amazing food in their entire lives. They said they would never forget this day. They promised her that they would tell everyone they knew about her and her tower and her incredible cooking. As they left, they did not look back. They walked down the mountain like men who had been changed forever, carrying the memory of magic in their bellies and in their hearts. Amber watched them go, and she knew that something had begun. She had shared her gift with humans, and she had seen the impact it had on them. She had seen them understand for a moment, something beyond their daily struggles and fears. She had given them joy. The two hunters told their story in every tavern and village they visited. They spoke about the tower in the mountains and the elf woman who lived there with two dragons. They described the food in detail, trying to make others understand the way it had tasted, how it had made them feel, how it seemed to contain some kind of magic. Most people thought they were exaggerating or lying. They said the hunters had been drinking too much or had gone mad in the wilderness. But some people believed them. Some people began to wonder if there might be truth in this wild story. Word spread slowly at first, passed from person to person like a whispered secret. Travelers began to ask about the tower in the mountains. Merchants started collecting information about where it was located and how to reach it. Some people dismissed it as a legend, but others became obsessed with the idea. They imagined food that could transform them, that could bring them joy and peace and understanding. They imagined a place where magic was real and wonders still existed in the world. Within a few months, people started arriving at Amber's tower. They came in small groups at first, usually 6 or 7 at a time, climbing the mountain path and arriving tired and hopeful. Amber welcomed them all. She had begun preparing larger quantities of food, understanding that word was spreading and more people would come. She spent her days cooking constantly, using everything she had learned to create meals that would honor the journey these people had made. Shimmer and Cole helped her prepare the food, and the dragons had become skilled at their tasks. Shimmer would help organize ingredients and keep everything clean and organized. Cole would taste things and help Amber decide if the flavors were balanced correctly. The dragons seemed to understand that these meals were important and special. They treated their work with the gravity of ancient ceremony. When the human visitors arrived, most of them reacted as the hunters had. They saw the tower and they saw the dragons, and they were filled with awe and a kind of holy fear. Many of them fell to their knees when they saw Amber, thinking she must be a goddess of some kind. Amber always gently helped them to their feet and invited them inside, trying to make them comfortable. The meals were always extraordinary. Amber made them with the intention of showing the visitors something about beauty and joy and creation. She made dishes that told stories through their flavors. She made a soup that tasted like the beginning of spring, filled with fresh herbs and light touches. She made bread that was warm and welcoming, a foundation for everything else. She made roasted meats with complex sauces that had been reduced and refined until they were liquid poetry. She made vegetables that had been transformed by fire and time into something nearly unrecognizable as their original form. and she made desserts that seemed to contain all the happiness that could exist in the world. People would sit at her table with tears running down their faces. They would eat slowly, trying to make the experience last as long as possible. Some of them would not speak at all during the meal, too focused on tasting and experiencing. Others would speak of memories that the food brought back to them, people they had loved who were gone, moments of happiness from their past, dreams they had forgotten they had. The food seemed to open something in people's hearts. It seemed to help them access parts of themselves that they had locked away. After eating, people would often ask Amber to tell them the secrets of her cooking. They wanted to know the ingredients and the techniques. Some of them asked if she would come with them and teach others. Amber would always smile and say that she could not leave her tower. But she would give people recipes written in her own hand. She would write down instructions with careful drawings and detailed explanations. She told people that if they wanted to learn, they needed to practice and fail and try again. She said that cooking was not something that could be learned instantly. It required patience and love and a willingness to be transformed by the process. As more people came, Amber realized she needed to organize things better. She began setting up specific times when people could come to her tower, once a week on a particular day. This allowed her to plan her cooking and to prepare large quantities of food in advance. People from the villages and towns below began organizing pilgrimages to her tower. They would travel together in groups, sharing stories on the journey, arriving at her tower with hearts full of hope and anticipation. The reputation of Amber's tower spread across the kingdoms and provinces. Bards began to sing songs about the elf goddess in the mountains. Storytellers told tales in taverns about the magic food that could heal hearts and minds. Kings and queens heard about the tower and wondered if they should send ambassadors to investigate. Merchants began planning trade routes that would pass near the tower so they could stop and experience the cooking themselves. Amber hired some of the local humans to help her with the work. She taught them how to prepare simple things, how to cut vegetables properly, how to keep the cooking chambers clean and organized. These helpers became devoted to her and her mission. They understood that they were part of something sacred and important. They worked for free, asking only for a meal at the end of each day and the privilege of being part of something meaningful. One day, a young woman named Lily came to the tower. She was different from the other visitors. Instead of coming to eat and then leaving, she asked if she could stay and learn. Lily was from a poor family in a village at the base of the mountains. She had heard about the tower and had saved money for a long time to make the journey. When she arrived and tasted the food, she felt something inside her shift. She felt called to this place. She asked Amber if she could become her apprentice, if she could learn the secrets of cooking. Amber said yes. Lily moved into a room in the tower and began to learn. She started with the simplest tasks, washing vegetables and stirring pots, but Amber taught her patiently, explaining why each step mattered, explaining the chemistry of cooking, explaining that food was conversation and love made edible. Lily was a quick learner and dedicated student. Within a year, she could make most of Amber's dishes on her own. Within 2 years, she was creating her own recipes and bringing new ideas to the kitchen. Lily became like a daughter to Amber. The two of them worked together in harmony, planning menus, creating new dishes, preparing meals for the constant stream of people who came to the tower. Shimmer and Cole loved Lily as much as they loved Amber. The dragons would follow her around and sleep in her room. It was as if the three of them, Amber, Lily, and the dragons, had become a family with a sacred purpose. Word of Lily's arrival spread among the people who visited the tower. People began to say that Amber was training someone to continue the tradition after she was gone. They began to understand that this was not just one woman's gift, but something that could be passed on to others. This seemed to make the tower even more special and important. People came not just to taste the food, but to witness something that felt like the passing of knowledge from one generation to another, from one way of being to another. Years passed, and the tower became a place of pilgrimage. People came from distant lands. Some came once and carried the memory with them for the rest of their lives. Some came multiple times, unable to resist the pull of returning. Some brought their families and their children, wanting to share the experience with people they loved. Some came when they were sick or sad or lost, hoping that the food would heal them or guide them. Many of them reported that it did. Many of them said that tasting Amber's food had changed their lives in ways they could not fully explain. Amber created a system where people could leave messages and stories. They would write down what the meal meant to them and leave the note in a room filled with thousands of similar messages. Amber read these messages whenever she had time, and each one moved her heart. She read about people who had found hope through her food. She read about families that had been brought back together. She read about people who had decided not to end their lives because the food reminded them that beauty and joy still existed in the world. She read about dreams that had been inspired by a single meal. She read about transformations that had happened in the hearts and minds of those who had tasted what she had created. Amber realized that her cooking had become something much bigger than she had ever imagined. It was not just food. It was medicine and prayer and art and communication all at once. It was a way of saying to humanity that they mattered, that their suffering and their struggles were seen and honored, that there was beauty and goodness in the world worth reaching for. It was a way of saying that an elf and a human were not so different, that they could share something meaningful and transformative. It was a way of saying that creation was the most important thing, and that sharing what you created with others was the highest calling. As the years passed, Amber's tower became known throughout the world. Ambassadors came from distant kingdoms to request the privilege of tasting her food. Wealthy merchants offered impossible amounts of gold and jewels for recipes or for Amber to come live in their cities. Kings and queens sent emissaries asking if they could commission special meals. Even priests and monks came to the tower asking if the food was blessed with divine power, asking if it was magic or miracle. Amber always gave the same answer. She said that there was no magic in the food except for the magic that existed in all creation, in all transformation, in all love. She said that the power of the food came not from her alone, but from the union of many things. The power came from the ingredients that grew in the earth and were given freely by nature. The power came from the fire that heated and transformed. The power came from time and patience and intention. The power came from the understanding that when you cooked for others, you were saying to them that their happiness mattered, that they were worthy of beauty and care. Many people did not understand her explanation. They wanted there to be magic, real magic, something supernatural and extraordinary. They could not believe that simple food, no matter how well prepared, could have such profound effects on people. But Amber knew the truth. She had learned it through years of cooking and observing the reactions of those who ate her food. She had learned that magic was not about breaking the laws of nature or doing impossible things. Magic was about understanding the laws of nature so deeply that you could work in harmony with them to create beauty and joy. Lily had become a skilled cook in her own right. She and Amber worked together seamlessly, often finishing each other's thoughts and movements. They had developed a system where they could prepare meals for hundreds of people at a time, while maintaining the quality and intention that made the food special. Lily had even begun to travel sometimes, going to nearby villages to teach people how to cook Amber's recipes. She would spend weeks in a village, living with families, teaching them techniques, helping them understand that they could create beautiful food in their own kitchens. But Lily also struggled with the fame and the pressure. She watched as people treated Amber like a goddess, and she worried that Amber would believe it, that she would become corrupted by the worship and the adoration. One day, Lily asked Amber directly if she thought she was a goddess. Amber laughed and said absolutely not. She said that she was just a cook who had gotten lucky enough to find her purpose. She said that the worship and the reverence were misdirected. They should be offered not to her, but to the act of creation itself, to the miracle that simple things could be transformed into something extraordinary through intention and care. Amber took Lily to the storage rooms and showed her something that Lily had never seen before. Hidden behind shelves of ingredients were thousands of bottles and containers. Amber explained that these were different ingredients she had collected over the years. She had ingredients from every part of the world. She had spices from distant eastern kingdoms, oils from Mediterranean groves, salts from deep ocean mines, sugars from tropical islands, grains from temperate plains. She explained that she was always learning, always exploring, always trying to understand new flavors and new combinations. Amber told Lily that this was the real secret of cooking. The secret was not to become a master and then stop learning. The secret was to understand that you would never know everything, that there would always be new things to discover, new combinations to try, new ways to bring joy through food. She said that the moment you thought you had learned everything was the moment you stopped growing. She said that cooking, like life itself, was a journey that never truly ended. There were always new mountains to climb, new horizons to reach for. Shimmer and Cole had grown old, but they were still strong and healthy. Years of eating Amber's food had kept them vibrant and energetic. They had become beloved by the visitors to the tower. Children would ask to pet the dragons, and Shimmer and Cole would allow it, seeming to understand that they were ambassadors of joy and wonder. Some visitors came as much to see the dragons as to eat the food. But the most important role that Shimmer and Cole played was as anchors for Amber. They kept her connected to what was real and simple and true. When Amber was tired or overwhelmed by the constant demands of her fame, the dragons would be there, asking for simple things like food or a walk or play. They reminded her that the most important things in life were often the simplest. They reminded her that love and loyalty and companionship were what truly mattered. One night, Amber sat in her tower with Lily and the dragons, looking out at the thousands of stars visible from the high mountain. Lily asked Amber if she regretted leaving the elven city, if she missed her family and her old life. Amber was quiet for a long time before answering. She said that she did not regret it, but she did feel sadness about it sometimes. She said that her family probably thought she was mad, choosing a short, intense life with humans over the eternal, unchanging perfection of the elven realm. But Amber said that she understood now what the ancient elves had never understood. She said that immortality and perfection were not the same thing as meaning and purpose. She said that humans, with their short lives and their struggles and their mortality, understood something that immortal beings could never grasp. They understood urgency. They understood that each moment mattered because it could not be repeated forever. They understood that creation and growth and change were not flaws but features of a beautiful life. Amber explained that this was why human cooking had moved her so deeply. It was because humans understood that food was not just fuel but love, not just sustenance but art, not just eating, but communion. Humans cooked with intention because they understood that time was precious. They put their hearts into what they made, because they knew that the people they were cooking for would not be around forever. They understood that every meal could be the last meal, so it should be beautiful and meaningful. Lily listened and understood. She realized that this was why Amber had chosen to teach her, why she had brought her into this sacred work. It was not because Lily was exceptionally talented, though she was. It was because Lily understood this truth about the preciousness of time and the meaning of creation. It was because Lily was willing to pour her heart into food and trust that it would matter, that it would make a difference in the lives of those who tasted it. As the years continued to pass, Amber began to think about legacy. She knew that she would not live forever, even though elves lived much longer than humans. She wanted to make sure that what she had created would continue after she was gone. She began to write down not just recipes but explanations of her philosophy, her understanding of why cooking mattered, what it meant to cook with love and intention. She and Lily created a cookbook unlike any other. It was not just a collection of recipes. It was a journey through Amber's understanding of food and life and beauty and meaning. It included her reflections on cooking, her stories about the people she had cooked for, her descriptions of how different ingredients worked together, her explanations of the spiritual and emotional aspects of preparing food for others. The cookbook became a sacred text, something that people would treasure not just for the recipes but for the wisdom contained within it. Word of the cookbook spread before it was even finished. Publishers from distant cities came to offer Amber extraordinary sums of money for the right to print it. Amber said that she would not sell it, but she would allow it to be copied and distributed freely. She wanted every person who wanted to understand her approach to cooking to have access to it. She wanted the knowledge to spread as widely as possible, to help people understand that they did not need to travel to her tower to experience the transformation that cooking with love and intention could bring. Lily began to train other apprentices, people who came to the tower wanting to learn and understand Amber's philosophy. Within a few years, there were 5, then 10, then 20 people living in and around the tower, all of them learning and practicing cooking, all of them preparing meals for the constant stream of visitors. The tower had grown into something much larger than just one building. It had become a school, a temple, a place of pilgrimage and learning. Amber looked at what was happening and felt a deep sense of peace. She had not expected any of this when she left the elven city and came to this tower in the mountains. She had only wanted to escape the monotony of eternal sameness and find something meaningful to do with her endless time. She had only wanted to understand the humans and their curious ways. But by following her curiosity and her passion, by taking the risk to be different and to pursue what called to her, she had created something that was transforming the world in ways she could never have imagined. One autumn morning, when Amber had been living in the tower for nearly 200 years, she stood on the balcony and looked out at the world she had helped create. The tower had grown into a complex of buildings with dormitories for apprentices, storage rooms for ingredients, teaching kitchens, dining halls, and gardens where vegetables and herbs were grown. The pathway up the mountain had been improved over decades so that people could reach the tower more easily. There was a small village at the base of the mountain where merchants and traders had set up shops to support the constant flow of pilgrims. The name of the tower was known in every kingdom and empire. People called it the Temple of Flavors, or the Tower of the Elf Goddess, or the House of Transformation, depending on their language and their beliefs. Children were told stories about it. Artists painted pictures of it. Poets wrote verses about the food and the magic that happened there. Scholars came to study how such a simple act as cooking could have such profound effects on culture and society and human hearts. But Amber had not stayed isolated in her tower. Over the years, she had traveled to some of the great cities, teaching cooking classes and sharing her philosophy. She had worked with wealthy chefs and poor families alike, showing them that the principles of cooking with love and intention were the same whether you were preparing food in a palace or in a small cottage. She had written letters to philosophers and scholars, discussing the nature of creation and meaning. She had even sent messages to the elven city where she had been born, trying to explain to her family what she had found and why she had needed to leave. Her mother had died many years ago without ever understanding why Amber had left. But her father, in his very old age, had sent a message back. He said that he finally understood. He said that Amber had taught the world something that the elves had never been able to grasp. She had shown that immortality and perfection were not as valuable as growth and meaning and connection. He said that he was proud of her, though he had not shown it when she was young. He said that she had chosen the harder path, but also the more beautiful one. Lily had grown old as well, though she would live longer than most humans. She had become the keeper of Amber's philosophy, working to make sure that what Amber had created would continue and spread. Together with the other apprentices and teachers, Lily had established schools of cooking in major cities throughout the world. These schools taught not just the recipes that Amber had invented, but the philosophy behind them. They taught that cooking was a sacred act, that it was a way of showing love, that it was a conversation between the cook and those who would eat the food. Shimmer had passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by Amber and Lily and the dragons of the next generation. She had lived longer than any dragon should have, her life extended by the love and care that Amber had given her throughout the decades. In her final years, she had become something like a wise elder, watching over the tower and its inhabitants with gentle eyes. When she died, there was a ceremony attended by thousands of people who had been touched by her presence. Cole lived on, ancient and wise, spending most of his time sleeping in the sun or sitting with Amber and Lily, asking for stories about the old days. The younger dragons that Cole had sired had become gentle companions to the apprentices and teachers. They had learned from their father and from Shimmer that cooking and creation were sacred, and they treated the kitchen as a temple and a holy space. One day, a scholar came to the tower with an unusual request. He had written a book about Amber's life and her impact on human civilization. He had traveled extensively, collecting stories from people who had tasted her food or learned from her teachings. He had interviewed the apprentices and teachers. He had studied the effects of her work on culture and philosophy and society. He wanted Amber to read the book and give him permission to publish it. Amber read the book with great interest. She was moved by what the scholar had discovered. He had documented how her cooking had influenced not just individual lives but entire societies. He had shown how the philosophy of cooking with intention and love had spread to other areas of human life and work. He had described how artists and musicians and poets had been inspired by her example. He had demonstrated that what she had started in a small tower in the mountains had rippled out to touch countless lives, in ways both visible and invisible. But Amber asked the scholar not to publish the book. She said that she did not want to be remembered as an individual genius or as someone special and unique. She said that she wanted to be remembered, if at all, as an example of what could happen when someone chose to follow their curiosity and their passion. She said that the real story was not about her, but about what people could create when they were given permission to be different, when they were given tools and knowledge, when they understood that their work could matter and could bring joy to others. The scholar was disappointed but respectful. He thanked Amber for her time and her honesty. As he was leaving, Amber gave him something. She gave him a package containing letters she had written to him, addressed to him specifically, though they had only just met. The scholar was confused, but Amber smiled and said that she had written the letters many years ago, not knowing who would receive them, only knowing that someday someone would come asking about her life and wanting to tell her story. The scholar opened the first letter that evening in his room at the tower. In it, Amber had written about the nature of creation and legacy. She had written that she understood the human desire to remember and to be remembered, but she said that the most important legacies were not the ones attached to individual names. The most important legacies were the ones that became so integrated into culture that no one remembered where they came from anymore. She said that the greatest success would be if, 100 years after her death, people cooked with love and intention without ever thinking about the elf woman in the tower. She said that would mean that what she had created had become part of the permanent human consciousness, part of the way humans understood themselves and their world. In another letter, Amber wrote about the meaning of her journey. She described leaving the elven city as the most important decision of her long life. She said that it had been frightening and lonely at times. She said that there had been moments when she regretted it and wanted to go back to the safety and perfection of her old life. But she said that she had never turned back because she understood in her heart that the imperfect, temporary, uncertain human life was richer and more meaningful than the eternal, perfect, unchanging elven existence. She said that this was the greatest discovery of her life, and she wanted to make sure that others understood it too. In a third letter, Amber wrote to the scholar about the nature of teaching and learning. She wrote that the greatest teachers were not those who insisted that their students follow them exactly. They were the ones who gave their students enough knowledge to go beyond them, to discover new things, to make new mistakes, to find new paths. She wrote that she was most proud of the apprentices and teachers who had taken what she had taught them and made it their own, who had added their own creativity and innovation to the tradition. She said that this was the only way knowledge and art could truly live and grow. Years passed, and Amber lived quietly in her tower. She continued to cook, though less often than before. She spent more time reading and reflecting and writing. People still came to eat at her table, though fewer than before. But those who came received meals that seemed to contain the accumulated wisdom and experience of her entire long life. Each dish told a story. Each flavor connected to a memory or a moment of understanding. People would sit at her table and feel as if they were not just eating, but receiving a benediction, a blessing from someone who had lived longer and understood more than they could ever hope to. Eventually, Amber grew very old even by elven standards. Her hair, which had always been silver, became white as snow. Her violet eyes grew dimmer, though they never lost their gentle light. Her hands, which had spent so many decades creating beauty through cooking, became thin and fragile, but her mind remained sharp and clear right up until the very end. On her last day, Amber sat in the tower with Lily and Cole, and the apprentices gathered around her. She did not speak much. She only asked to smell the spices one more time, to touch the ingredients that had been her companions for so long. As the sun set over the mountains, she closed her eyes and let go of her long, long life. The world mourned her passing. Kingdoms declared days of remembrance. Scholars wrote extensive essays about her life and her impact. Artists created tributes, but Amber would have been pleased that the most important tribute was what people did in response to her death. They cooked. They gathered together with family and friends and created meals filled with intention and love. They understood in that moment of collective grief and reflection what Amber had been trying to teach them all along. Lily lived for many more years after Amber's death, continuing the work, training new generations of apprentices, spreading the philosophy of intentional cooking throughout the world.